Hello, and welcome to another session of our discussion of the United Methodist Social Principles. We are looking this week, starting at the bottom of page 26, and covering media and communications technologies. And then we will be looking at the next section, pornography. And amazingly, they have quite a bit of overlap when we start talking about media and use. So this first statement on media and communications technologies has several sections, and I'm going to read each paragraph honestly for each of its separate little pieces because there's so much in this one. So the first paragraph says, "We support freedom of public expression, which encompasses freedom of the press and the right of all societal members to share their perspectives and opinions. We also insist that all media companies operate with civility and respect and adhere to established journalistic standards. We affirm the positive roles that media and communication technologies play in educating the general public, holding government and other societal leaders accountable, and promoting the common good." So that first paragraph has quite a few little things in it. It talks about freedom of the press, freedom of expression. It talks about our ability to share perspectives and opinions. It talks about civility and respect and established journalistic standards. And it talks about holding government and leaders accountable while promoting the common good. And I would love to see and have the feeling that all of our media's purpose was promoting the common good. We did talk, as we were talking about that, how different people have different ideas of what the common good is, and that's why we end up with different perspectives in our media. The next paragraph says we are concerned about media monopolies and the tendency of media control to rest in the hands of a few large corporations, and we encourage individuals, communities, and governments to be vigilant in the enforcement of antitrust policies. We actually, as we talked about this, got into a little bit more. We also talked about how places in our world have governmental control over media, and that can lead to limited perspectives as well, where it's not just a corporate control, but it's a governmental control and hearing propaganda only. But we'll get there in a little bit. Paragraph 3 builds on that in many ways. We recognize that, like every other human endeavor, the media can be used by unscrupulous people to manipulate public opinions, distort facts, and shape misinformation, hostility, and fear. We deplore the proliferation of hate speech across social media, broadcast and print news, and other platforms, and we call upon citizens and regulators to do all in their power to eliminate it. We also encourage individuals to take care when expressing their views on social media, recognizing the need for compassion and the harm that can be done to others when such compassion is lacking. So this third paragraph actually is an interesting one because it begins by talking about how some people will control media to manipulate things, to distort the truth, to spread hostility or fear. And then it moves slowly from that view of being concerned about the few to, at the end, it asks us very personally to consider whether or not we are using compassion, whether we are causing harm with our use of social media in particular. So this is a paragraph that moves through the dangers and reminds us not only do large companies have responsibility for this, but we also do as individuals. And then the last paragraph of this one is further, media and other communication technologies lack adequate or diverse representation of marginalized communities, including women, ethnic groups, people with disabilities, impoverished people, and others. We believe that media and communications technologies should be open and accessible to all, foster norms that promote civility and respect, and protect the dignity and worth of all people, including society's most vulnerable. So this last one is about a diversity of representation, how everybody should have access to communication technology. It shouldn't be just limited to some. It talks about civility and respect again, and protecting the dignity of all people. So one of the first things that came up in our discussion was, what media are we talking about? Are we just talking about the news? Or are we talking about all media and communications? And I think we're talking about all media and communications. We're not just talking about what CNN or Fox News say. We're talking about what is played on the radio music-wise, what is on television, what are we posting on Facebook. This is all media and communication. So this is everything from movies to books to magazines to news, newspapers, videos, YouTube, the whole scope of media and communications technologies, which means this is a big, 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 big thing. So we talked about what our experience of media and communication was like, and of course that went all over the place. And so then to narrow it down a little bit, I ask, when have we seen media used for good? When have we seen it doing that promoting the common good thing? And some of the things that people came up with were like missing persons reports, so that we knew who to look out for, disaster warnings. There are some people that run advertisements that are really feel good or help us to be aware of doing good. St. Jude's was mentioned in particular. One person said that here locally for us, they felt like the news teams that we have choices of from the various television stations locally, that there's diverse choices, that there's different points of view and perspective, and that you can get fairly diverse news here. Let's see, what else? Kitten videos as a positive thing, because people like to watch kitten videos. Talking about social media, some of us have seen social media bring people together in amazing, powerful ways. Whether that is in watching the Super Bowl and connecting with others who are watching the Super Bowl, or whether that's watching Jesus Christ Superstar and connecting with others who are watching it, or reconnecting with family or reconnecting with old friends. Social media has the ability to be a wonderful and good thing. We also talked about how it can connect people for prayer and concerns, and we can let people know of needs that we have, and that can be a wonderful thing as well for people. Then we moved to, when have you seen it used for harm? And of course we went to lies and distortion and not telling the truth, when media has intentionally distorted facts. We talked about places where the government controls news. A couple of us have experienced that in our travels around the world, experiencing propaganda in East Germany, in North Korea, some of those places where the news was very much a propaganda form. We've seen the negative effects of bullying in social media. I think we could go on and on. There were, I think, far more time spent on talking about the negatives of media than the positives. One of the things to acknowledge about mass communication like we have today is that it's a fairly modern thing. That's not really something that was dealt with in the Bible. There are some examples that we do have of kings using propaganda and spreading either truth or lies, carving things into stone that were propaganda about themselves and maybe bent the truth a bit or exaggerated some things, but wanted to have the group begin to think about what are some of the principles and truths in the Bible that help us think about our use of media and communications. What are some things that we can say, this is a biblical truth that helps us think about the best way to use media and communications? So there were some really good things that came up in that. Probably the most common one was that there are many places in the Bible where it talks about how we use our words and what are we doing with them. Are we tearing people down, or are we building them up? Are we encouraging, or are we destroying? That our tongues can be a double-edged sword, but they can also be a source of great good. So that was one of them that really applies well. We talked about gossip and how that is similar to what's happened sometimes on social media. We talked about Pilate asking, what is truth? A very political statement, I think. Could hear people saying that today, too. What is truth? And yet we're called to follow one who says, I am the way, the truth. We talked about how we are supposed to, as human beings, show our full selves, our vulnerabilities, our good, our bad, and how we're not to be whitewashed tombs where we only show the good and yet inside us is still unclean. And how sometimes on social media we only present a whitewashed version of ourselves, a version that is purified, that doesn't show our struggles. And yet being vulnerable and being real with who we are and what we're going through can be an expression of our deeper selves. As I was looking at some things, I did find what I thought was actually a very helpful question from the Denver Institute about use of social media. And its question was, who does your presence on social media benefit? Do your posts, tweets, or status updates advance your own interests or serve others? I found that challenging. That goes back to that very first paragraph from this section, which says that media and communication technologies play a part in educating the general public, holding government and other societal leaders accountable, and promoting the common good. So when we're using social media, and this is really fitting as we're moving into a time of election, are we promoting the common good? Are we advancing our own self-interest, or are we serving others? And think carefully about that. And again, admittedly, we may not agree on what it means to promote the common good, but hopefully we'll begin to think about it in terms of very Christ-like attitudes. From there, we went on to pornography, which in some ways seems like a pretty big stretch or change, and yet most of pornography is spread by, at least now, by mass communications media. This statement says, "We strongly oppose pornography and lament its destructive impact upon cultures, families, and individuals. Pornography is an affront to our deeply held conviction that human sexuality is a precious gift from God. The issue of pornography is one that has dramatically impacted many, both within and outside the worldwide church. Though graphic images have been available for centuries, the widespread prevalence and availability of sexually explicit and aggressive materials today have led to an increasing problem of addiction for many, including young people who have come of age with the internet in their homes and on mobile devices. We call upon all United Methodists, and I think we need to listen really carefully to this because it doesn't say some things we'll get into in a minute, but listen to very specifically what it does say. We call upon all United Methodists to support actions to develop effective societal and government policies to eradicate child pornography, as well as adult exploitation and enslavement. We further call on the Church to offer non-judgmental support, rehabilitation, and care to those who have been affected by the harmful impact of pornography on their lives. One of the first things that I ran into as I was thinking about this, because reminding us again that this is a worldwide statement, and what is pornographic or what is acceptable in different cultures is very different. And that certainly has been the case over time as we look back on history. So there have been times and there are places where where a woman showing her hair would be considered an affront. It would be pornographic almost. There are places where showing an ankle is is too much. And yet there are others where there's a comfort of nudity even more than perhaps we are in the United States. So that there's this wide spectrum within the world. And so how do you define pornography? I went to the National Institute of Health, and they did some significant research on trying to get a definition of that. And in the end, they ended up with two definitions which are quite different from each other, but I think help us to have two different conversations about pornography. The first one is, the first definition of pornography is sexually explicit materials that intend to arouse. So the purpose then of this definition of pornography is those things that are intended to arouse others. The second is a countercultural definition of pornography. And what I mean by that is it's understanding that sometimes people label something as pornography in order to censor it and silence it. So the second definition is pornography is not a thing, but a concept, a category of texts, and I would add images, managed by institutions led by powerful groups in society in order to control the circulation of knowledge and culture, changing according to geographical location and period. This is a definition which is focusing on when some people in power label something as pornographic so that its voice is silenced. So we went to then our experience of pornography as defined by definition number one. What are some of the dangers and what are some of the things we've seen where pornography is that explicit materials meant to arouse? I think we had mentioned in one of our earlier sessions that one person ran into it in their workplace where there was pornography displayed all over the place, and that was felt objectifying. It felt threatening because she didn't feel like she was being seen as a whole person and wondered what people were thinking as that was all over the place. The statement on pornography from the social principles itself mentions several difficulties. It mentions addiction. It mentions exploitation. It mentions enslavement. So we talked about drugs, the number of people who get caught into pornography because they are addicted to drugs. And so they're not necessarily consensual in the explicit videos that are taken, but being used. We talked about the gender treatment, the way men and women are portrayed and their interactions in sexuality in pornography. and whether those are healthy relationships or unhealthy ways in which people are being portrayed. We talked about one person had experience working in a video store that had a porn room. We didn't get into a lot of detail there, but noticing the people who came and went from that. One person had been in Las Vegas and people were handing them pornography just out in the street and how that made them uncomfortable. And we talked about photo manipulation, something I hadn't even thought about, but it's coming more and more, where photos and videos can be manipulated to have someone's image on them who didn't participate in the pornography and hasn't given permission for their image to be used. So there's a lot of issues, potential harm from pornography being used as a means of arousal, primarily because it's not using people ethically and treating people well. The second definition of pornography is that one in which powerful groups try to silence certain peoples and messages. Certainly, I have experienced that where I've seen people going to the library and trying to remove books, children's books that were about normal experiences for some children that didn't talk about sexuality at all, but they were calling them pornography because one of them, a penguin, has two dads. It's not about sex, but in their perspective, they were seeing it as something that was unacceptable. And so they were trying to remove it as pornographic under that second definition as something that shouldn't be out there for kids. I personally thought that was not a healthy way or a not healthy thing to do, was to try to remove books that are depicting what some people actually experience in a wonderful way. But that is that second definition coming into effect, where pornography becomes a means of censoring or not allowing certain people's voices. We've seen that with some other books about young people and their experience growing up, and that being censored because groups didn't particularly like the discussions of sexuality that were happening. Let's see. So then one of the things that we talked about is the differences between pornography and healthy sexuality. And healthy sexuality is realizing that as we interact with others, we are sexual beings. You can't deny that. But we are more than that. So when we see another, we're not looking at them simply as a sexual object. If we're doing that, that's objectifying them. That's not helpful. Instead, we're seeing that they have a mind, that they have opinions, that they have strengths and weaknesses in how they relate to things, that they have abilities to contribute to society. There is so much more than just the sexuality. But healthy sexuality also does acknowledge that between us as human beings, in certain relationships, we certainly encourage that in the marriage relationships, that sexuality is a healthy and wonderful thing. It is, as the statement says, a precious gift from God. So it's a good thing. But pornography has a way of turning it into something that has stripped away a lot of that goodness, that relationship, that love, that consensual sense of being together. And that's really how it's different from healthy sexuality. We talked about some scriptures that come to mind with this. Matthew 5:28, that's the passage about any man who looks at a woman lustfully has committed adultery. And so there's that temptation feeling of committing adultery in the looking. We talked about the biblical commandment not to covet one's neighbor or one's neighbor's wife, and so on and so forth. But that sense of coveting, desiring, wanting, and putting that above a relationship and interaction in a more full way. Philippians 4:8 begins to turn it on a positive view of what we think about. From now on, brothers and sisters, if anything is excellent and if anything is admirable, focus your thoughts on these things: all that is true, all that is holy, all that is just, all that is pure, all that is lovely, and all that is worthy of praise. And finally, the book of Song of Songs, or some have called it the Song of Solomon. It's a pretty sexual book. There's descriptions of male and female bodies in it, and there's definitely some sexual attraction going on in there, and yet it's in a healthy and romantic setting, and one that depicts that sexuality as something which is good and given by God. And so the balancing of seeing where sexuality can be a positive thing versus a negative thing is really important as we talk about pornography. Did we come to any definitions that would allow us across all cultures to say this is pornographic and this is not? No. Did we say we really need to think about what we are doing in terms of what we're viewing? Is it good for us? Is it leading us into issues of addiction? Are we exploiting people or enslaving people? Is our children involved that should not be? All of these things obviously are problematic, and we need to work to move away from. So there we have our media and social media and communications, and even into pornography. Thank you for joining us on this day, and hope that you come away with a few challenges today about how you are protecting the dignity and worth of all people, including society's most vulnerable. How you are using all the media that's available, and whether you're using it in self-interest or whether you're promoting the common good. Have yourselves a wonderful and beautiful day.